When Officer Daniel Reed found a crippled German Shepherd during a whiteout near Pine Ridge, he thought it was just another rescue. But the microchip under its skin revealed something chilling. Property of Pine Ridge Police Department, retired K9, Shadow. The same dog from a case the department buried 2 years ago. What started as compassion became a fight against his own command, and what Shadow led him to will break your heart. Stay till the end, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true stories of courage that redefine what family means. The snow fell in long, slanting ribbons over Highway 2, the kind of Montana night when even the mountains seemed to vanish. Officer Daniel Reed kept the cruiser steady at 20 miles per hour, wipers squealing against the windshield. His 10-year-old daughter Emily sat beside him wrapped in her red scarf, tracing circles in the fogged glass. It was close to midnight and they were both too awake. Daniel had taken the night shift because the storm was closing the schools anyway, and because empty nights at home since Melissa's death had become unbearable. Emily's voice broke the quiet. "How long till the next town?" "Maybe 20 minutes, he said, "if the plows keep ahead of us." Outside, the wind screamed through the guardrails, scattering snow like sand. Then Emily pointed. "Dad, what's that?" At first, Daniel thought it was debris, a fallen branch, maybe a dark trash bag stuck in the drift. But when the spotlight swept across it, the shape moved. He slowed the cruiser. 2 front legs scraped at the snow, dragging the rest of a heavy body behind. The animal's fur was black and tan, matted with ice. It tried to crawl not toward escape, but toward the light. Daniel parked at an angle, switched on his flashers, and stared. "Stay inside," he told Emily. "Lock the door." The wind slapped him as he opened his door. Cold cut through the seams of his gloves before his boots hit the ground. The world outside the headlights was white chaos, but the shape in the beam was clear now. A German Shepherd ribs, visible hind legs, twisted uselessly behind. Its breath came out in shallow bursts. Daniel crouched a few feet away, hands out, voice calm. "Easy, buddy. You're all right." The dog didn't growl. It just looked at him with eyes so steady it felt like a question. He saw frost burn on its paws and a strip of leather frozen to its neck. He rubbed at the collar until the letters appeared. Shadow. He tried the radio. "Dispatch Unit 12-mile marker 146. Injured canine requesting animal control." Static. He tried again. Nothing. The storm had buried every signal. When he turned, the cruiser's window cracked open and Emily's voice slipped through the snow. "Dad, he's freezing." He waved her back, but she didn't close it all the way. The dog heard her voice and tried to lift its head toward the sound. That single effort decided everything. Daniel knelt, sliding his arms beneath the animal's chest. The weight hit like a sandbag. The dog whimpered once, but didn't resist. "You're okay," Daniel murmured, tightening his hold. His knees sank into the snow. His breath came out in fogged bursts. 3 steps later, he reached the cruiser. The back door opened from inside. Emily had leaned across the seat to pull it. She had spread her winter coat on the floorboard. "Put him here," she said softly. Daniel eased the dog onto the coat, then wrapped it in the spare blanket from the trunk. The smell of wet fur and blood filled the warm air as he climbed back in. "Seatbelt," he said automatically. Emily clicked it, but didn't look away from the back seat. "What's his name?" Shadow Daniel said. The name fit the color, the silence, the way the dog watched them. He turned the heater to high and eased onto the road. The tires bit through layers of ice, crunching like broken glass. Emily twisted around in her seat. "He's breathing right." "Yeah," Daniel said. "Barely." A few minutes later, the first tremor ran through Shadow's body, a weak shiver that told him warmth was returning. He remembered enough about first aid to know that was good. He also knew the clinic in Pine Ridge would charge more than he could pay. But he didn't say that. He just drove. The wipers beat time against the wind, and Emily finally leaned her head against the glass, whispering, "We're gonna help you, okay?" Daniel thought she was talking to the dog, but maybe she wasn't. The road curved along a ravine where the guardrail had half vanished under snow. The lights ahead flickered the small veterinary sign glowing faintly like a promise. Daniel pressed the mic one more time out of habit. "Dispatch Unit 12 transporting injured animal to Pine Ridge Veterinary Clinic. No contact with animal control. Only static answered." He hung the receiver back in place. The storm was swallowing the road behind them, erasing any sign they'd stopped. For a moment he imagined what would have happened if they hadn't seen the movement if they'd kept driving. He didn't finish the thought. Instead, he glanced in the mirror. Shadow's eyes were open now, following Emily's voice as she hummed a tune from nowhere. The rhythm matched the wipers. Daniel felt the familiar ache behind his ribs, the mix of fear and relief that comes every time you save something you're not sure you can keep alive. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel and whispered almost to himself, "Hang in there, boy. We've got you." The cruiser pushed forward through the falling snow, the red taillights fading into the white. Somewhere behind them, the mailbox they had passed stood half buried, the only witness left in the storm. The clinic sat at the edge of Pine Ridge, its roof weighed down with snow and a single light flickering above the entrance. Daniel parked close to the door engine, running for heat, and checked the back seat. Shadow was still breathing faintly but steady. Emily had her gloves pressed together like a small prayer. "He's still with us," she whispered. Daniel nodded and opened his door. The cold bit into his face again as he carried the dog inside, boots squeaking against the wet tile. A tall woman in a green jacket looked up from the counter. Her name tag read, Dr. Ellen Hart. "We're closing soon," she said, then saw the animal and her tone changed. "Exam room 2. Hurry." Daniel laid Shadow on the steel table. The dog's eyes fluttered but didn't resist the hands working over him. Dr. Hart's assistant, a young man with tired eyes, clipped away the frozen fur and whispered vitals. Temps dangerously low. Back trauma. Could be spinal. Dr. Hart listened, her expression tightening. "Officer Reedwright?" she asked, noticing his badge on the coat. "You've got a situation here. I'll be honest, this dog needs surgery. Fast. Without it, he won't make the night." Daniel rubbed his neck. "What are we talking?" She hesitated. 10,000, maybe more, depending on what we find once we open him up. The number hit him harder than the wind outside. There's no discount for a stray. If it's a department animal, maybe the city helps. Otherwise. She didn't finish. Emily stood near the doorway, silent, watching her father do the math that never adds up right when compassion is involved. Daniel looked at the stainless floor. "I'll cover what I can. Just do what's necessary to keep him alive until morning." Dr. Hart nodded, already giving instructions. Warm fluids, oxygen, IV. The assistant moved quickly. When Daniel turned toward the hall, he saw Emily had disappeared from the doorway. He found her a minute later in the waiting room beside the vending machine. She held a glass jar in both hands, the kind with faded stickers and a strip of masking tape labeled Vacation Fund. He recognized it instantly. It had been Melissa's idea years ago. She would drop spare change in it and promise that one day the three of them would drive to the ocean. The jar was maybe half full, mostly quarters. Emily twisted the lid loose and began counting quietly. "We can use this," she said without looking up. "It's Mom's money. She'd want us to." Daniel knelt beside her, the ache in his chest sharper than the cold. "Em, that money's for you. For things she wanted you to see someday." "Then this is one of them," Emily said, eyes bright with tears she refused to let fall. She liked dogs. Remember the beagles? He did remember the noise, the joy, the small chaos of home. He took a slow breath. All right, he said softly. We'll keep it safe for now. Dr. Hart's doing her best. He didn't promise more. Back in the exam room, the doctor had shaved a patch of Shadow's neck and was sliding a scanner across the skin. The machine beeped and displayed a string of numbers. He's chipped, she said. Let's see who he belongs to. She typed on the computer, frowning as the record appeared. Daniel moved closer. The screen showed property of Pine Ridge Police Department, retired K-9. Shadow badge 417, Handler Officer Henry Dawson. Daniel blinked. Pine Ridge PD. That's this department. Dr. Hart turned the monitor so he could see the details. Looks like he served about 6 years, retired 2 years ago after a training accident. Henry Dawson. Daniel repeated. He was in K-9 Unit 72. He disappeared last winter. Dr. Hart looked at him. You knew him not well. Different shifts. But I remember the notice when he went missing. Daniel's throat tightened. He stared at the dog, the scars near the spine, the worn leather collar. The idea that Shadow had once worn the same badge crest as his own felt heavier than the uniform on his shoulders. Dr. Hart cleared her throat. That means he's technically city property. The department would have to authorize expenses. You can't make that call yourself. Daniel nodded, already feeling the weight of bureaucracy sliding back over the moment like ice reforming on glass. Understood, he said. But don't stop what you're doing. I'll make some calls. He stepped into the hall, pulling his phone from his pocket. The signal bar flickered weakly, but he reached Captain Miller after a few tries. The man's voice crackled through the static. Reed, you're supposed to be off duty. What's going on? Daniel explained quickly, the blizzard, the dog, the microchip. There was a pause long enough for him to hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above. Then Miller said, That animal's retired. We closed Dawson's file months ago. No funding left. If it's still alive, good, but it's not a department liability anymore. Don't tie yourself to this, Daniel. Drop it at animal control when the road's clear. Sir, it's critical he might not make it till morning. That's not your call, Miller said. Voice firm. You've done enough. Get home safe. The line clicked off. Daniel stared at the phone, the weight of the conversation sinking deeper than any snowdrift outside. When he returned to the room, Dr. Hart was adjusting the IV. Stable for now, she said, but without surgery. She didn't need to finish. Emily was watching from the corner, her hands still around the jar of coins. Shadow's eyes moved once toward her voice when she whispered his name. Daniel looked at them both, the child and the broken dog, and felt the same question rising in both sets of eyes. How far does duty go when compassion costs this much? The answer was not written in any handbook. He looked at Dr. Hart. Do what you can tonight. We'll figure out payment in the morning. Outside, the storm howled around the eaves, rattling the windows like a reminder that morning wasn't guaranteed for anyone. By dawn, the storm had thinned into silence, leaving the town buried in pale blue snow. Daniel hadn't slept. The glow from the hospital monitors painted Shadow's body in cold light, each flicker of the IV bag marking another minute they couldn't afford. When Dr. Hart entered, she looked exhausted but calm. He made it through the night, she said. But he won't last long without surgery. Daniel nodded, rubbing the bridge of his nose. I'll talk to the department again. He stepped outside, the cold air sharp enough to sting. The roads were passable now, gray ruts carved through white. His cruiser was still covered in frost. As he scraped the windshield, his phone buzzed with a message from Captain Miller. Report to the station at 0900. Bring all documentation on the K-9 incident. Daniel arrived at the Pine Ridge Police Department half an hour later. The small building smelled like coffee and old carpet. Miller's office door was open. The captain sat behind his desk reading a printed report. Close the door, he said without looking up. Daniel obeyed. You called last night about a retired K-9 Miller. Continued. I spoke with the city manager this morning. They confirmed what I told you. That animal is no longer covered. The handler's deceased, the file's closed, and the city has no legal or financial responsibility. Daniel stayed silent. Dr. Hart submitted an estimate, Miller said, tapping the page. $10,000. We can't authorize that. Liability closed means closed. So what happens to him? Daniel asked quietly. Miller sighed. Animal control will take custody this afternoon. The vet's been notified. Procedure's simple, humane. You did your duty. Now it's out of your hands. Daniel felt the words settle in his chest like stones. He wanted to argue, but Miller's tone was final. You're a good officer, the captain added. Don't let sentiment make you reckless. Daniel left the office with a nod he didn't feel. The bullpen was quiet, only the hum of the vending machine and the chatter of the scanner. He stood by the window for a long moment, watching the snow melt into gray slush. His reflection in the glass looked older than he remembered. That evening, he returned to the clinic to check on Shadow. Emily insisted on coming wrapped in her parka, clutching the now empty jar. Dr. Hart met them at the door, her eyes troubled. Animal control called, she said. They'll be here in the morning. Emily's face went pale. To take him, Dr. Hart nodded. I'm sorry. Orders from the department. Daniel placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. Let's say goodbye tonight. Okay. Emily didn't answer. She walked into the room where Shadow lay. The dog's breathing was shallow but steady, his head lifting when he saw her. She knelt beside him, whispering words Daniel couldn't hear. Dr. Hart handed Daniel a clipboard. If you sign here, it authorizes transfer to city custody. He hesitated, pen in hand, and then signed. The sound of the pen scratching the paper felt louder than it should have. That night after dinner, Daniel sat at the kitchen table staring at the signature. Emily had gone to bed early, quiet in a way that made him uneasy. Outside, the world was dark again, the storm replaced by stillness. He poured himself a cup of coffee that went cold, untouched. Around midnight, a noise from the hallway pulled him up a soft creak, the front door latch. He moved to the window just in time to see his daughter's small figure in the snow dragging a sled covered by a blanket. He didn't need to lift it to know what was beneath. Emily, he called softly, stepping onto the porch. She froze halfway down the path. The wind lifted her scarf. He was crying. Dad, she said, voice trembling. I couldn't let them take him. Daniel looked at her, the desperation in her eyes, the same look he'd seen in his mirror for weeks. Behind her, the shape under the blanket stirred. Shadow's head lifted faintly. Daniel walked toward them slowly. You can't carry him far, he said gently. He's too heavy. Then help me, she whispered. Something inside him broke quietly, not in pain, but in recognition. He looked back at the house, then at his daughter. All right, he said. Let's get him somewhere safe. Together they carried the dog into the truck, wrapping him tighter in the blanket. Emily climbed into the passenger seat, silent except for her breathing. Daniel drove toward the ridge road where the forest thickened and the cabins were half buried in snow. He knew a friend's old hunting cabin stood there unused since autumn. By the time they reached it, the moon had risen through thin clouds. The cabin's door stuck from the cold, but it opened after one hard push. Daniel laid Shadow near the stove and lit a fire from the leftover wood. The flames caught slowly, spreading warmth through the small room. Emily sat beside the dog, stroking his fur. Will they find us? She asked. Not tonight, Daniel said quietly. He turned his phone off and set it on the counter. The silence between them wasn't fear anymore. It was a fragile peace born from choice. When Shadow's breathing steadied, Daniel tucked a blanket around Emily. "Get some sleep," he said. She nodded, eyes heavy. He stayed awake watching the fire burn lower, thinking about the badge in his wallet and what it meant now. When dawn touched the windows, he made his decision. Back in town, before the station opened, he typed a short letter and left it on Miller's desk. "Effective immediately, I resign from Pine Ridge PD. Please forward paperwork to my address." He placed his badge beside it, its metal dull under the office lights. As he walked out, snow began to fall again, soft, unthreatening this time. The kind that covered tracks rather than revealed them. The mountain air smelled of pine and smoke, the kind that carried silence instead of sound. Morning light spilled through the cracks of the cabin walls, tracing thin lines across the wooden floor where Emily lay asleep beside Shadow. Daniel stood by the small stove, watching the fire eat through the last of the logs. He hadn't stopped thinking since he left his badge on Miller's desk. Freedom should have felt like relief, but it only felt like quiet guilt. Shadow stirred as the light warmed his fur. Emily woke when the dog whined softly. "He's hungry," she said, rubbing her eyes. Daniel smiled faintly. "Then he's getting stronger." He poured water into a pan, mixed instant oatmeal for Emily, and opened a can of dog food Dr. Hart had slipped into his coat pocket before they left. The smell filled the room, and Shadow lifted his head, trying to move. Daniel saw the strain ripple through his shoulders and the frustration that followed when his hind legs refused to respond. "We'll work on that," Daniel said gently. After breakfast, they cleared a small space near the stove and laid a blanket there. "We'll call this his training mat," Emily said, excitement cutting through the fatigue in her voice. She had seen enough videos of canine therapy to know the basics: support under the belly, gentle movement, patience. Daniel watched her hands, small but steady, as she guided Shadow's hind leg forward and back. "You'll make a good doctor one day," he said. Maybe she replied, smiling. "Or maybe I'll just fix dogs." By noon, the sun melted the snow outside enough to reveal patches of frozen ground. Emily insisted they open the door so Shadow could feel the air. The cold carried the smell of the forest and something else, hope. "Hey, boy," she said, kneeling beside him. "You used to chase bad guys, didn't you? You can do this." She tapped her palm on the floor. "Come on, Shadow. Try." Daniel was about to tell her not to expect too much when it happened. The dog's front legs pushed forward slow and trembling, and for the first time one of his back paws twitched. It wasn't much a reflex, maybe, but it was real. Emily gasped and looked at her father. He moved. "Did you see it?" Daniel crouched beside her, watching the faint movement repeat. The sight hit him harder than any speech could. After weeks of losing his badge, his job, his faith, this tiny motion felt like the world shifting back toward life. "Good boy," he whispered. "You keep listening to her." Emily's laughter filled the cabin clear and bright against the quiet woods. For the first time in months, Daniel laughed too. The sound startled even Shadow, who blinked up at them as if trying to understand what joy meant. That afternoon, while Daniel chopped wood outside, Emily rummaged through the supplies they had brought from the clinic. Blankets, ointment, an old canine vest with faded Velcro. The vest smelled like dust and time. She brushed it clean and tried to fit it on Shadow, adjusting the straps until it sat across his shoulders. When she reached into one of the inner pockets, her fingers touched something hard. She pulled out a small plastic ID card, cracked at the edges but still legible. It read, "Officer Henry Dawson, Unit 72, Pine Ridge Police Department." A faded photo of a man in uniform stared back at her, hand resting on the very dog lying beside her now. Emily studied the name. "Dad," she called softly. Daniel wiped his hands and stepped inside. She handed him the card. The color drained from his face. "Where did you find this?" "In his vest," she said. "Is he the one who owned Shadow?" Daniel turned the card over. The back held a department clearance date 2 years ago. He remembered the report Officer Henry Dawson K-9 Handler missing during a snow rescue mission. Car found near Glacier Trail. No body recovered. Declared presumed dead after 3 months. The department had closed the case quietly. Yes, Daniel said finally. He was one of ours. Emily traced the name again. So he's gone. That's what they said. Then Shadow lost his partner. The weight of her words pressed into the small space like a truth neither of them wanted to face. Daniel looked at the dog at the scars near his spine. Maybe that's why he was out there, he said quietly. Maybe he was looking for him. Emily frowned, thoughtful. If Shadow found us instead, maybe he was supposed to. Daniel nodded slowly, letting the thought settle. The fire crackled softly, and for a long while they just sat in its warmth, 3 souls bound by loss and something that felt close to healing. When night fell, Daniel stepped outside to gather more wood. He looked toward the dark stretch of road below the ridge and imagined the world beyond the station Miller Dr. Hart, the laws he had broken, the badge he had given up. For once, the weight of those choices didn't feel unbearable. Inside the cabin, Emily was humming softly while Shadow rested beside her, his paw twitching again as if chasing a dream. Daniel smiled and whispered to the cold air, "We'll get through this, all of us." By mid-January, the mountains turned cruel again. The snow came heavier than before, swallowing the narrow road to the cabin until it vanished beneath white drifts. Daniel split wood every morning, his breath visible in long trails that disappeared into the cold. Inside, the fire never went out, but even warmth couldn't stop the feeling that the world was closing in. Emily's lessons were done on scraps of paper, now math on grocery receipts, spelling on the backs of envelopes. She never complained. Shadow had become their clock, his breathing the rhythm of their days. The exercises continued, though slower. Some mornings his strength faltered. His eyes remained bright, but the spark in his legs faded as pain grew sharper. The medicine Dr. Hart had given them was running out. Daniel counted the remaining pills on the counter, 5 small tablets left, each one a reminder of time he couldn't buy. The first real storm of the season hit that week. It howled through the pine trees and bent the roof beams until the whole cabin groaned. Daniel checked the radio for updates but only found static. On the 3rd day of isolation, a letter came. It had been delivered by a snowmobile courier who refused to come inside, just handed the envelope and drove off without a word. The letter bore the Pine Ridge City seal. Daniel opened it by the stove, Emily watching from the table. The words were short and clinical. Notice of pension suspension, Officer Daniel Reed. Due to violation of departmental protocol and unauthorized interference with property of the Pine Ridge Police Department, benefits are hereby frozen pending investigation. His throat tightened. He reread the sentence twice, but the meaning didn't change. He had lost his badge and now the security that came with it. Emily's voice was small. "What does it mean?" Daniel folded the letter. "It means we'll have to be careful for a while." He didn't tell her that careful meant choosing between fuel and medicine food and guilt. That night he sat by the fire, long after Emily fell asleep, the letter beside him. Outside, the wind screamed through the gaps in the shutters. Shadow whimpered in his sleep, and Daniel reached down to touch his head. "You saved people once," he whispered. "Now it's my turn." The next morning, he tried to stretch the medication by cutting the pills in half. Emily noticed, of course. "Will that still help him?" she asked. "It'll have to," he answered. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she wrapped her scarf around Shadow's neck like a medal. "He'll fight," she said firmly. Daniel nodded, though his hands trembled. Days blurred together in shades of gray and white. The storm broke briefly on the 7th night, leaving the sky sharp and clear. The moon turned the snowfields silver. Daniel had just banked the fire when a soft sound came from outside, a crunch of footsteps too measured to be wind or animal. He moved to the window, scanning the tree line. Nothing. Then a shape near the porch, small, dark, unmoving. He opened the door cautiously. Cold air rushed in, carrying flakes that stung his skin. On the top step lay a brown envelope, edges damp from snow. No tracks led away from it. Only silence. He brought it inside, heart pounding. The envelope was unmarked except for a single word written in ink across the front. For Shadow. Emily woke as he slid it open. Inside was a thick stack of bills, crisp and real $50 notes bound with a rubber band. $5,000. Beneath them lay a folded piece of paper. Daniel opened it carefully. The handwriting was uneven but familiar from old reports he'd signed at the station. He once saved my life. Save him again. No name, no address. Only those 9 words. Daniel stared at the page until the letters blurred. He remembered Officer Henry Dawson's handwriting from his training log, strong, but slanted the same way this note curved. Emily leaned closer. "Who's it from?" she whispered. "I don't know," Daniel said softly, "but I think it's someone who knew him." He looked toward the corner where Shadow lay half asleep, the firelight glinting on his eyes. Maybe someone who owed him more than we understand. He folded the note and slid it into his pocket. "What are we going to do with the money?" Emily asked. "We're going to buy him another chance," Daniel said. The next morning, while Emily fed the dog, Daniel made a decision. The nearest town with a pharmacy was 40 miles away, and the roads were still half buried. He loaded the truck with extra blankets, checked the fuel, and looked back at his daughter. "Stay inside till I'm back," he said. "Lock the door. If anything happens, use the radio." She nodded, too brave for her age. "Bring back what he needs," she said. Daniel smiled faintly. "That's the plan." As he drove down the frozen trail, he glanced in the mirror. The cabin grew smaller behind him, smoke rising in a thin line against the white hills. The envelope rested on the seat beside him, the note folded neatly on top. He didn't know who had left it or how they had found him, but for the first time in weeks, he felt less alone. Somewhere between the miles of ice and silence, hope had found its way back. The truck climbed the narrow forest road, its tires crunching through ice that cracked like glass under weight. Daniel followed the map in his head more than the one on the dashboard. The envelope still lay on the passenger seat, the mysterious note folded above the bills. The handwriting lingered in his thoughts, too personal to belong to a stranger. The trail curved west, then dipped toward the frozen valley where old ranger posts once guarded the border of Pine Ridge National Forest. The last supply stop had been abandoned years ago after a landslide. Now only deer and wind crossed that ground. He hadn't planned to detour, but instinct, something older than reason, told him to go. After 2 hours, the forest grew denser. The pines stood like silent witnesses. When the radio lost signal entirely, Daniel stopped near a collapsed sign that read, "White Hollow Ranger Station." He killed the engine, stepped into the cold, and listened. Somewhere beyond the trees came a faint metallic sound. Metal scraping wood, repeated slowly, as if someone were trying to fix something. He followed it uphill, boots sinking deep into snow. The noise grew clearer. Around the bend, half buried under snowdrifts, stood a wooden cabin with a chimney patched by tin. Smoke rose weakly into the sky. Someone was there. Daniel approached cautiously, hand near his jacket pocket, though there was no weapon inside anymore. When he knocked, the sound startled a figure inside. The door creaked open, revealing a man with a beard streaked gray and eyes dulled by time. His left leg was twisted, supported by a crude brace. He looked at Daniel with confusion, first, then wariness. "You're trespassing," he said, voice rough. Daniel took off his hat. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm looking for someone." The man hesitated. "There's no one here but me." Daniel studied him. The name on the card Emily had found came back like an echo. "Henry Dawson?" he asked softly. The man froze. For a moment, the only sound was wind against the roof. Then he stepped back, letting the door open wider. "Who sent you?" "No one," Daniel said. "But someone left me $5,000 and a note written in your hand." He took the folded paper from his coat and placed it on the table near the door. Henry's eyes widened as he traced the writing with a shaking finger. "I wrote that a year ago," he whispered. "Left it at the old post office in town with a woman I knew. I didn't think it would ever reach anyone." Daniel took a breath. "You were listed as missing. They said you died." Henry gave a broken laugh. "Might have been easier if I had." He sank into the chair beside the small wood stove. "After the accident, they found my truck by the ravine. I couldn't walk. Shadow dragged me out half a mile through snow. He kept me alive for 2 nights before help was supposed to come. But no one came. When I finally crawled to the service road, he was gone. I thought he died out there." Daniel felt the truth slide into place like a long-lost puzzle piece. "He didn't die," he said quietly. Henry looked up sharply. "What Shadow's alive?" Daniel said. "We found him 3 weeks ago. My daughter and I. He was injured, but he's healing." For the first time, Henry's face broke. Tears came without warning. He covered his eyes, shoulders shaking. "He's alive," he repeated. "After everything I did." Daniel waited. When Henry finally spoke again, his voice was raw. "The accident was my fault. We were tracking an avalanche rescue. I ignored the weather alerts pushed too high on the ridge. The snow gave way. Shadow jumped toward me, tried to pull me back, but I slipped and took him with me. His spine hit a rock when we landed. I carried that sound with me every day since." "You saved lives before that," Daniel said quietly. "And destroyed one," Henry replied. "When I crawled out, I couldn't face the department. Couldn't face him. I left everything behind. Been here ever since." He rubbed his leg absently. Frostbite took half the feeling. "I don't deserve visitors." Daniel looked around the small cabin, makeshift walls, shelves lined with empty cans, the bitter smell of loneliness. "You deserve to know he's waiting," Daniel said. "He remembers." Henry's hands trembled as he reached for his coat. "Take me to him." "It's a long trip back," Daniel warned. "You're not strong enough." "I don't care," Henry said, pushing himself up with a cane. His face was pale, but his eyes held something fierce. "He saved me once. I won't die before I see him again." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "All right, let's get you in the truck." They stepped into the cold, Henry leaning heavily on his cane. The snow had started again, fine powder drifting like dust. By the time they reached the clearing, Henry's breathing was ragged. His hands shook violently. "You okay?" Daniel asked. Henry tried to answer, but the words came out as fog. He stumbled once, caught himself, then collapsed to his knees. Daniel caught him before he hit the ground. "Henry." The man's lips moved, barely audible. "Tell him. I kept the light on." His head fell forward. Daniel checked his pulse, faint, but there. He lifted him into the truck, wrapping him in blankets, turning the heater to full. The forest outside blurred as the engine roared to life. "Hold on," Daniel whispered. "You'll see him. I promise." Snow began falling harder again, swallowing their tracks as quickly as they formed, but the road ahead glowed faintly under the moon, just enough light to follow. The wind rose like a scream against the mountain as the storm closed in. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter, the wipers slapping in useless rhythm against snow that refused to clear. The old truck's heater wheezed out more noise than warmth. Henry lay in the back seat under 3 blankets, pale and shivering. Emily sat beside him, holding Shadow's paw beneath another layer of fabric. "He's cold again," she said softly. Daniel glanced in the mirror. Shadow's breath came shallow, fogging the air. "We're almost home," Daniel said, though he wasn't sure where home even was anymore. The road had vanished under white. He could only follow the faint line of trees marking the edge of the ridge. The gas gauge hovered near empty. The radio hissed static. He pressed the call button again. "This is Reed. Anyone copy?" Only the storm answered. Henry stirred. "Don't stop," he murmured. "If we stop, we freeze." Daniel's knuckles were white against the steering wheel. "We won't stop." But 5 minutes later, the engine coughed a hollow, dying sound, and the headlights dimmed. The truck shuddered once, then fell silent. The world outside swallowed them whole. Emily's voice cracked. "Dad." Daniel turned the key again. "Nothing. Fuel line's frozen," he said quietly. The cold crept in instantly, wrapping around them like invisible water. The temperature outside had dropped below -15. He grabbed the emergency blanket, tucking it tighter around Emily and Henry. "We'll wait it out. Someone will come through in the morning." He tried to believe it. The sky beyond the windshield was a swirl of white. Henry coughed weakly. "You should have left me," he whispered. "Would have been easier." Daniel shook his head. "Not after all this." But the conviction in his voice was fading. Time slipped. The storm erased all sense of distance or hour. Emily's breathing grew shallow, her lips pale even in the dim light. Daniel rubbed her hands, trying to bring warmth back. "Hey, stay with me," he said softly. "Remember the beach Mom used to talk about? We'll go there when this is over." Her eyes flickered open. "Promise, promise," he whispered. But his fingers were numb. He couldn't feel his own pulse anymore. Then, in the silence between gusts, Shadow lifted his head. His ears twitched as if he heard something beyond human range. Slowly, painfully, he pushed his front legs forward, dragging his back half across the seat. Daniel reached out. "Easy, boy. Stay down." But the dog's eyes locked on the window on the white beyond. Something in them burned a trace of instinct duty memory. He barked once hoarse but fierce, the sound sharp in the small space. Then he turned toward the door, claws scraping against metal. "Shadow, no." Emily tried to grab his collar, but he twisted free. With one last look toward her, the dog shoved his body forward and hit the latch. The cold slammed in as the door burst open. Snow poured through like smoke. Daniel lunged, catching only the edge of the blanket as Shadow slipped into the storm. Shadow. His shout was lost instantly. The world outside swallowed the name whole. For a moment, none of them moved. The open door let in a wind so sharp it felt like glass. Daniel slammed it shut again, breathing hard. Emily was crying quietly now, tears freezing against her cheeks. "He's out there," she whispered. "He'll die." Daniel pulled her close. "He's done this before," he said, though doubt twisted through every word. "He knows how to find help." Henry opened his eyes, voice barely a rasp. "He's going home." Daniel turned toward him. "What do you mean?" "The ridge," Henry whispered. "When I was trapped." He went downhill, followed the creek. "There's an old ranger shed, maybe a signal tower." His voice faded. "He remembers where people are." Daniel looked out the window again. The storm was thickening, a wall of white swallowing the forest. He knew going after the dog now was suicide. Yet the image of Shadow crawling alone through snow wouldn't leave his mind. He pressed his forehead to the steering wheel. "Come on, boy," he murmured. "Find someone. Just one person." Hours dragged by. The wind battered the truck, shaking it like a toy. Henry slipped into unconsciousness. Daniel checked his pulse, still there, faint but steady. Emily's breathing slowed, her skin icy to the touch. He pulled her into his arms, wrapping the last blanket around them both. "We'll make it," he whispered again and again until the words became prayer. Then through the roar of the storm, a distant sound rose faint at first, then clearer. Not wind, not thunder, a bark, then another. Daniel's eyes shot open. Shadow. He pressed his face against the frozen glass, but all he could see was darkness and snow. Still, the sound came again closer this time, followed by a flicker of orange light too low and steady to be lightning. It moved, growing brighter like someone carrying a lantern through the white. Daniel blinked hard, unsure if it was real. Emily stirred. "Dad." He squeezed her hand. "Hold on. Someone's coming." But inside, he wasn't sure if it was rescue or the last thing they'd ever see. The wind had calmed to a long, hollow moan when Daniel woke. The truck was half buried in snow, the windows crusted with frost so thick it blurred the world outside into pale gray. Emily's breathing was faint against his chest, her lips tinted blue. Henry lay still in the back, unmoving, but alive. Daniel's body was numb, his mind dull, but one thought broke through Shadow. He forced himself upright, joints stiff from the cold. The world outside was deathly quiet. Then, somewhere in the distance, a faint bark echoed, thin, desperate, but unmistakable. Shadow was still out there. Daniel shook Emily gently. "Stay here, sweetheart," he whispered. "I'll be right back." She stirred, but didn't answer. He wrapped her tighter in the blanket, then pulled on his coat and stepped into the blizzard's wake. The snow reached past his knees. The cold burned his lungs with every breath, but he followed the sound one bark at a time until the shapes of trees emerged through the veil of white. Shadow's paw prints led him down a slope toward the frozen river. They were uneven dragging marks between each step, the trail of a body fighting its limits. Shadow Daniel shouted. The wind carried his voice away, but the barking came again closer this time. At the edge of the riverbank, he finally saw him. Shadow stood half buried in snow-front legs, trembling, his body angled toward a mound beside the ice. His voice was weak but persistent, barking at something under the drift. Daniel stumbled forward, falling twice before reaching him. "What is it, boy?" he asked, dropping to his knees. He brushed snow aside, fingers hitting something hard metal, square-edged, half-frozen into the ground. It was an old supply crate, the kind used by rescue teams years ago. He pried it open with a rock, and inside found a bundle wrapped in waterproof fabric, emergency blankets, flares, and a sealed packet of rations. The label was faded, but one line was still visible. Pine Ridge Unit 72, Dawson H. Daniel exhaled a shaky breath. "You led me here," he whispered. Shadow's tail twitched once before he collapsed onto the snow, exhausted. Daniel tore open the crate, pulling out a thermal blanket and wrapping it around the dog. "Hang on, buddy." His hands shook as he found the flare tube. Inside were 6 sticks, the kind that burned bright red for miles. He struck one against the metal edge, and it burst to life with a hiss, flooding the riverbank with light. The flare's glow painted the snow crimson, reflecting off the ice like a living heartbeat. Daniel raised it high, waving toward the ridge. "Over here," he shouted into the wind. He planted the flare upright and lit another, then another, creating a circle of light that pulsed against the snow. For the first time in hours, warmth touched his face. He knelt beside Shadow, pressing his ear to the dog's chest. A heartbeat weak but steady. "You did it," Daniel said, voice breaking. "You found what we needed." Minutes dragged by, or maybe an hour. The light of the last flare flickered low. Then faint, at first came a sound, a low rumble, mechanical, distant, but real. A helicopter. Daniel looked up, eyes blurring with relief. He waved the remaining flare in wide arcs, shouting until his throat gave out. The searchlight swept over the valley once, then again, locking onto the flare's glow. The helicopter circled lower. He could see figures in orange rescue jackets moving through the snow toward him. "Over here," Daniel shouted again, though his voice was gone. 2 rescuers reached him first. One grabbed his shoulder. "We got your signal. How many are with you? 2 people?" "And a dog," he managed. My daughter and a man. They're in the truck up the ridge. Let's move, the rescuer said. He handed Daniel an oxygen mask and wrapped a heated blanket around him. Another knelt beside Shadow, checking his pulse. Still breathing. Tough old shepherd. They loaded Shadow onto a stretcher, the fabric glowing red under the flare light. Daniel followed them back toward the ridge legs, barely cooperating. When they reached the truck, Emily was still conscious but weak. The rescuers moved fast, wrapping her in thermal sheets and administering warm fluids. One of them radioed the chopper. We've got 3 survivors, 1 canine, all hypothermic but stable. Daniel climbed in beside his daughter as they lifted off. Below, the flares still burned against the white, tiny stars marking the place where Faith had refused to die. He looked down at Shadow, now wrapped in silver fabric beside them. The dog's eyes were closed, breath shallow, chest rising in rhythm with the engine's hum. Emily reached out weakly and touched his paw. He came back, she whispered. Daniel nodded, tears freezing at the corners of his eyes. He never left us. When the helicopter banked east toward Pine Ridge, Daniel looked through the window one last time. The frozen river glittered below, and beside the red glow of the last dying flare, he could see faint paw prints leading from the truck to that single crate, a perfect line of instinct, courage, and memory. Shadow had followed duty into the storm once more, not for orders, but for love. The morning light through the hospital blinds was soft, muted, and far too calm for what Daniel remembered of the night before. The steady beep of the monitor anchored him back to the present. Emily slept in the next bed, color returning to her cheeks under a pile of white blankets. Shadow lay in a small recovery pen nearby, bandaged and breathing slow but steady. Daniel exhaled for the first time in days. A nurse walked in, smiling faintly. "You're lucky," she said. "That dog might have saved all 3 of you. Search team said the flares were visible for miles." Daniel managed a tired smile. "Yeah, he's done saving people his whole life." She adjusted the IV and left quietly, leaving only the hum of the heater and the faint scent of disinfectant. A few hours later, Captain Miller arrived, his heavy coat dusted with snow. Daniel sat up straighter, bracing for confrontation. The captain didn't speak right away. He placed a small black device on the table, a dash camera. "We recovered this from your truck," Miller said. "Your last patrol unit recording before the resignation?" Daniel frowned. "I thought those files were erased." "Not all of them," Miller said, pressing play. The small screen flickered to life, showing footage from the night Daniel found Shadow. The camera's microphone had caught everything, the commands, his attempts to call dispatch, the care with which he lifted the injured dog. Miller watched in silence until the end. Then he spoke quietly. The board reviewed this. The ethics panel ruled it as humane intervention under emergency protocol. "You didn't violate procedure, Daniel. You upheld it." For a moment, Daniel couldn't speak. The words felt unreal after months of doubt and loss. Miller continued, his voice softer than Daniel had ever heard. "The department is reinstating your benefits. Officially, the case is closed." He paused, looking at Shadow through the glass. "Unofficially, I'd say you brought more honor to that badge off duty than most do in 20 years. Daniel lowered his gaze. "I didn't do it alone." Miller nodded once and placed an envelope on the table. "Your reinstatement papers. Sign them when you're ready." He turned to leave, but Daniel stopped him. "Captain," he said, "there's something else you should see." Henry's voice came from the doorway before Miller could answer. "That would be my part of the story." The older man was pale but upright, leaning on a cane wrapped in hospital flannel. The nurse tried to stop him, but he waved her off gently. Miller's eyes widened. "Dawson, you're supposed to be dead." Henry smiled faintly. "Not dead. Just tired of being wrong." He took a seat beside Daniel's bed, his hands trembling slightly. "You deserve the truth, both of you." He took a deep breath before speaking. 2 years ago, I was sent with Shadow to retrieve a civilian family trapped in the canyon. Command ordered us to hold position until backup arrived, but the snow was closing fast. I could hear the child crying over the radio. I went anyway. His gaze drifted toward the window. We reached them just before the avalanche. The mother was pinned under debris. I got the boy free, but the ridge gave way. Shadow pushed the child clear before the slide hit us. That's how he hurt his spine. When I woke, I thought he'd died under the snow. I couldn't face the report. I wrote my statement and disappeared. Miller rubbed a hand across his jaw. "You disobeyed direct orders." "Yes," Henry said simply. "And I'd do it again." He looked at Daniel. "He saved that child's life, and because of him, I got to save mine later. The guilt never left, but seeing him alive..." His voice broke. "It means everything." Daniel reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "He never gave up on you, Henry. Even when you did." The room fell silent except for the steady rhythm of Shadow's breathing. Emily stirred, waking slowly. When she saw Henry and Miller, her eyes widened. Did it work? Did they make it right? Daniel smiled gently. They did. She turned her gaze toward Shadow. "Then he can rest now." Miller cleared his throat. "The department wants to hold a small ceremony. Not official, just a recognition for the men and dogs who remind us why we wear the badge in the first place." Henry chuckled softly. "If it includes a heater and real coffee, count me in." Daniel laughed the sound light for the first time in months. Miller gave a rare smile before stepping out. When he was gone, Henry looked at Daniel again. "You know you didn't just save Shadow. You saved me from becoming a ghost." Daniel shook his head. "You did that yourself when you wrote that note?" Henry smiled. "I just hoped someone kind would find it. Didn't expect it to be a man who understood." Later that evening, Daniel sat beside Emily's bed as the sun dipped behind the snowy hills. The orange light spilled through the window, touching Shadow's fur with warmth. The dog opened his eyes briefly, gaze soft and knowing. Daniel whispered, "We're home, buddy. You did it." Shadow's tail moved once in acknowledgement. Emily reached for her father's hand. "Can we take him home when he's better?" "Yes," Daniel said quietly. "We'll all go home." Outside, the town lights flickered on one by one, and for the first time in a long while they felt like stars instead of warnings. Spring returned to Pine Ridge like a slow apology. The last of the snow melted into clear streams that curved through the valley, carrying pieces of winter away. Daniel stood beneath the new bronze archway at the entrance of the Canine Memorial Park, his uniform pressed badge polished but unpretentious. The crowd was small officers from nearby towns, families, a few children holding flags. A band played softly, the notes blending with birdsong. Emily held his hand, her red scarf fluttering in the breeze. Shadow walked beside them, a slow but steady rhythm, his gait uneven, but his spirit undimmed. Every step was a miracle, earned, not granted. At the center of the park stood the new Canine Rehabilitation Wing, its stone facade engraved with names of dogs who had served and fallen. A banner stretched across the entryway, Pine Ridge Canine Recovery Center, built in honor of service and loyalty. Donations had come from across the country after their story spread a retired officer's act of compassion that reminded people what duty truly meant. Daniel had tried to deflect the attention, but every time he looked at Shadow, he knew it belonged to him, too. Henry Dawson sat in a wheelchair near the front row, wrapped in a blanket, smiling faintly as people greeted him. He looked better, stronger even. "You clean up well," Daniel said, shaking his hand. Henry chuckled. Still can't feel half my leg, but the coffee here's better than what I had up in that cabin. Emily kneeled beside him. Shadows walking again, she said proudly. Henry looked at the dog who paused near the podium and wagged his tail. He always had more courage than sense, Henry said softly, his voice warm with affection. The ceremony began. The police chief from Helena spoke first, thanking everyone for their contributions. Then Captain Miller took the podium, his voice clear over the hum of spring air. Today isn't just about rebuilding a facility. It's about remembering the ones who stayed when walking away was easier. He turned toward Daniel and gestured for him to join. The crowd clapped as Daniel stepped up. He wasn't used to speeches, and the paper in his hand trembled slightly. He looked out at the faces before him, men and women in uniform, children on their parents' shoulders, Henry smiling from his chair, Emily standing beside Shadow. He began quietly. I didn't set out to make a story anyone would remember. I only followed what felt right when everything else was wrong. Sometimes the hardest part of wearing this badge isn't the danger, it's deciding who you are when no one's watching. He paused, glancing at Shadow, who sat obediently at his feet. This dog taught me more about honor than any manual ever could. He never questioned orders, never lost faith even when the world forgot him. He reminds us that loyalty isn't about obedience. It's about love. For a moment, the breeze carried silence through the park. Then Daniel looked down at his notes and smiled. There's a new inscription here, he said, motioning toward the memorial stone behind him. It reads, "For those who stayed when walking away was easier." I think that line belongs to every handler, every officer, and every dog who stood their ground, even when it cost them everything. His voice caught slightly. And maybe it belongs to fathers and daughters, too. Applause rose, gentle but steady, blending with birdsong. Shadow lifted his head and barked once, a deep, strong sound that echoed off the memorial walls. The crowd turned toward him, laughter and tears mingling in the same breath. Henry clapped slowly, eyes glistening. He's saying you spoke well, he called out. Daniel laughed, kneeling to scratch behind Shadow's ear. You always have the last word, don't you? The dog leaned into his hand tail, thumping softly against the grass. Emily joined them, resting her small hand on Shadow's back. He's happy, she said. He knows it's all over. Daniel nodded, looking out across the park, the flag rippling above the new center, the sunlight catching on the metal letters of names long remembered. It's not over, he said quietly. It's just the start of something better. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Daniel, Emily, and Henry stayed behind. They walked, or in Henry's case, rolled down the stone path lined with paw-shaped plaques. The scent of wildflowers drifted through the air. Daniel stopped before the main monument, where the inscription gleamed beneath the sunlight. For those who stayed when walking away was easier. He traced the letters with his fingertips. Emily crouched beside him, whispering, "That's what you did, Dad." He smiled faintly. "That's what we all did." Shadow stepped forward, placing one paw on the stone as if claiming it for every creature that had ever fought to come home. The motion was slow but sure. The onlookers nearby noticed and began to applaud quietly. Daniel felt something in his chest ease at last, the weight of years of duty, guilt, and loss replaced by peace. As they turned to leave, the sun broke fully through the clouds. Its warmth touched the grass, the bronze statues, the people who lingered just a little longer to watch. Shadow barked again, not in pain or confusion, but with the clear, confident voice of a survivor. Emily laughed and ran ahead with him, her red scarf streaming behind like a ribbon of life. Daniel looked at Henry, who nodded once. "You see," the older man said softly, "no miracles, just the right people doing the right thing." Daniel smiled, eyes following the dog and the girl. "That's miracle enough for me. If this story touched you, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe for more true stories of courage and second chances. What part moved you the most, Shadow's final act or Daniel's choice to break the rules for what's right? And where are you watching from tonight? Tell us in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts.